As the Civil War was coming to an end in 1865, the Adjutant General of the United States ordered that all prisoners be traded back and forth between the Confederacy and the Union. Two of the most infamous prisons in America were in the South, in Andersonville, Georgia, and in Cahaba, Alabama. Between these two prisons, in the 18 months prior to the end of the war, almost 50,000 men traversed through these two prisons. The conditions within them were horrible. More than half of the men who were brought to these prisons died in the prison. Those lucky few that survived battles such as Gettysburg, Antietam, Fredericksburg, and Chancellorsville found their way into the southern prisons of Cahaba and Andersonville, only to run the risk of death within the prison. The survivors of those great battles and of the prison camps finally had hope. They knew that they were about to go home. The war was over. These ex-prisoners, anticipating their way home, were encamped just outside of Vicksburg, Mississippi, at a location called Camp Fisk, sometimes referred to as 4 Mile Camp. They remained here several days, preparing to be boarded on board the boat, the Sultana, at the Vicksburg harbor. The Sultana was constructed in 1863, and it was built at a cost of only about $90,000. It was, for its time, one of the elite steamboats of the Mississippi River. It was 260 feet long, 36 feet wide, and 42 feet in width at the beam. It was built to be 1,700 tons in weight and including freight, and yet it drew only 4 feet of water at the bow. The captain of the boat itself, J. Cass Mason, offered a bribe to one of the underling officers, a Captain Edward Tillinghast. This bribe was forwarded on to the Assistant Adjutant General in charge of boarding here in Vicksburg, and before it was finished, there would be 6 to 8 men involved in paying and receiving bribes, receiving favors, and simply dereliction of duty. The Sultana, over a period of 2 days, was loaded with in excess of 2,500 passengers. Of those 2,500, over 2,200 were former prisoners of war from the Cahaba and Andersonville prison camps. They were squeezed on board the boat in a manner that many had to be carried on and laid in place, unable to move around because there was no room. It finally left Vicksburg, Mississippi, en route to Helena, Arkansas, then Memphis, Tennessee, then Cairo, Illinois, and finally to St. Louis. One of the 4 tubular boilers was extremely weak, and it had been repaired within the last 2 weeks, just a small patch being placed over a very serious stress scene. The first morning after leaving Vicksburg, the boat arrived in Helena, Arkansas, where it picked up a little bit more freight and dropped off a few passengers. A man by the name of T.W. Banks was set up to take a photograph, which turned out to be the final photograph ever taken. If you look at that photograph, you will see that the boat is tipping significantly to the port side because of an overburdened passenger list, because of too much weight shifting to the port side in order to be in the photograph. On April the 26th of 1865, the boat arrived in Memphis, Tennessee, where it left off about 30 passengers and then immediately went directly across the Mississippi River to Mound City, Arkansas, where it took on an additional load of coal for the remainder of the travel upriver. After the boat left Mound City, It began to move northward up the Mississippi River against a very high river level, a river that was out of its banks and in a storm. At 2 in the morning on April the 27th of 1865, the weakened boiler, stressed even further because of the extreme weight and the motion and the stress of the overflowed Mississippi River, became overpressurized. One of the boilers, like most likely the weakened boiler that had been just patched earlier, exploded. With that explosion, almost immediately 2 additional boilers exploded. The explosions were very cataclysmic. It is estimated by some of the survivors that maybe as many as 400 to 500 people were killed instantly, with their bodies blown into the air above the Mississippi River by the force of the explosion of 3 of these boilers. There were no survivors found after the first 12 hours, and approximately 500 survivors of the explosion and fire were taken to Adams Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee. Eventually, more than 200 of those survivors would die of wounds and burns while in the hospital, and are now buried in the National Cemetery in Memphis. The remaining passengers and crew, nearly 2,000, perished. It's an amazing story because so few people in American history have ever heard of this boat. It is the greatest loss of life shipwreck in American history. Why have people never heard of the Sultana? There were so many huge stories in that 24 hours. Things that people were interested in, such as the surrender of Joe Johnson, the killing of John Wilkes Booth, and Abraham Lincoln's death train. Not to mention that after 4.5 years of war, people were tired of it. People didn't want to read any more about death, particularly large-scale death such as this. What makes the Sultana so important is it truly was the last great tragedy of the Civil War. It was the last great death, the last great event of the Civil War.